I remember that evening so clearly, like a scene from a movie I've watched too many times. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon and sugar. My homemade pie was still warm, wrapped in foil with care. I added 2 slices of his favorite chocolate cake, the kind he always asked for on his birthday. Tucked between them was a note I had rewritten 5 times, trying to find the perfect balance between "I miss you" and "I love you." Daniel had been staying late at the office for weeks, and I told myself he was just stressed, overwhelmed. Still, something in me craved connection, or maybe I was chasing a version of us we hadn't been in a long time. I slipped on my coat, glanced in the mirror, and smiled. Not because I felt beautiful, but because I hoped this would make him smile. That was the point, really. I wasn't looking for grand gestures or apologies. I just wanted a small moment back, a shared bite of pie, a kiss on the cheek, a reminder that we still knew how to find each other in the mess. I got into the car with my heart tapping against my ribs like it knew something I didn't. The night was quiet, the streets nearly empty, and I imagined what he might say when he saw me. "You didn't have to do this," with that little grin that made everything feel all right. I pictured him leaning back in his chair, tired but grateful, pulling me into one of those long, safe hugs. I let my mind wander there, to the softness of it all. Because sometimes, when the heart aches, you wrap it in daydreams like a blanket. And that night, I was clinging to hope like it was all I had left. The office building looked different at night, colder somehow, all glass and silence. I parked in the visitor lot, grabbed the basket from the passenger seat, and took a deep breath before heading in. The night guard, a kind older man named Walter, gave me a familiar smile. "Bringing him a treat, huh?" he chuckled, holding the door open for me like he always did. I nodded, trying to play it cool, but my palms were sweating. "Just a little surprise," I said, hoping the crack in my voice wasn't as obvious as it felt. The elevator ride was quiet, just me and my thoughts echoing in that tiny space. I thought about how things used to be, how he'd bring me lunch when I was buried in deadlines, how we used to laugh in the car with the windows down and no destination. Somewhere along the way, life got heavy. Work, bills, routines. I kept wondering if love always had to grow quieter with time, or if maybe we'd just stopped listening. Tonight, I was trying to speak louder, with pie and cake and one small note. As I stepped into the hallway, the familiar hum of overhead lights buzzed softly above me. His office was near the end, that same door I used to wait outside of when we'd meet for dinner. I could almost hear his laugh, the way it used to be before the late nights became normal, and the kisses goodbye turned into distracted nods. I walked slowly, balancing the basket, heart thudding. I wanted to believe this would mean something, that he'd see it for what it was, not dessert, but an offering, a plea for us. I paused just outside his office door, adjusting the strap of my purse and smoothing my hair with one hand. My other hand held tight to the basket, like it was holding me together. I could hear the soft hum of his desk lamp, the faint clicking of a keyboard, maybe even his voice on a call. I smiled to myself. This was the moment, the surprise. I imagined him looking up, tired eyes softening when he saw me. "Jess," he'd say, surprised but touched. That's what I was chasing, that flicker of warmth we used to live inside. But instead of knocking, I stood there for a second longer. Something in me hesitated, a whisper I couldn't quite hear, a heaviness in the air I couldn't name. I adjusted the note inside the basket one last time, making sure it sat just right. It read, "You're still my favorite part of every day." I almost laughed at how cheesy it sounded now, how vulnerable it felt. But that was the thing about love, wasn't it? You had to be a little brave, a little foolish. I lifted my hand toward the doorknob, heart brimming with hope. And just as I reached for it, something made me freeze. A sound. Soft. Breathy. Laughter. A woman's laugh. Then a voice, low and familiar, murmuring something I couldn't make out. My fingers hovered in the air, trembling. I leaned closer, barely breathing. Through the crack in the door, a sliver of light poured out. And what I saw on the other side? That changed everything. At first, my brain didn't register what I was seeing. It felt like I'd walked into the wrong scene, like my eyes had betrayed me. Or maybe I was dreaming. Daniel's back was turned to me, but I knew that silhouette like my own reflection. And the woman in his arms? Her laughter had stopped. Her head was tilted up toward him, lips parted in a way no wife should ever have to see. My hands, still holding the basket, went numb. Everything inside me went painfully, brutally quiet. I didn't scream. I didn't make a sound. The note I'd written, the pie I'd baked, the pieces of my heart, they all slipped from my fingers and hit the floor like broken glass. I watched from the hallway, frozen in place, as Olivia, his secretary, touched his face like she belonged there. And Daniel? He kissed her like it was the most natural thing in the world, like I didn't exist. I backed away one step, then another, as if retreating could somehow undo what I'd just seen. My chest burned, but I couldn't cry. Not yet. Rage had started bubbling up through the numbness, like fire under ice. I turned and walked out without saying a word, my footsteps slow and steady, as if I were afraid I might explode if I moved too fast. Walter, the guard, smiled again when I passed by. But I couldn't meet his eyes. I felt like a ghost, hovering in my own life, watching everything unravel. And as I stepped into the cold night air, one truth settled over me like a storm cloud. This wasn't just betrayal. It was war. The ride home was a blur. I don't remember the turns I took, the red lights I stopped at, or the songs playing on the radio. I just remember gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing tethering me to reality. Every breath hurt. Not in a dramatic way. In a quiet, dull, soul-deep ache. I kept hearing that laugh. Hers. Over and over again. Like it had been stitched into my memory in permanent thread. I thought of all the nights he'd texted, "Working late, babe," and how easily I'd believed him. When I got home, the silence swallowed me whole. The lights were still on from when I left, my half-drunk tea sitting cold on the counter. The house looked the same, but nothing felt familiar anymore. I sank into the couch, coat still on, shoes still wet from the pavement. That's when the tears finally came. Hot, bitter, relentless. Not because he cheated, but because I had loved him so fully. So blindly. And I realized then that he had walked away from something real for, what? A thrill? An ego stroke? But the sadness didn't last long, because something else had started to rise up inside me. Something darker, sharper. Rage. And not the kind that burns out quick. No. This was a quiet kind of fury, the kind that plans, that calculates, that waits. I wiped my tears and sat up straighter, breathing in the bitterness and letting it settle. I wouldn't beg. I wouldn't scream. I'd think. And then I'd make damn sure they both remembered who I was. I walked into the kitchen and stared at the second slice of cake still sitting on the counter. Untouched, innocent. I picked it up slowly, ran my thumb along the edge of the plate, and then dropped it straight into the trash. There was no poetry left in that cake, no sweetness in any of it, just crumbs. Crumbs of who I had been. And that woman, the one who baked pies and wrote notes and hoped her husband would come home with a kiss, she died the moment that office door cracked open. But something else was born in her place. Not a monster, no. I wasn't about to turn into someone bitter or cruel. But I was about to become someone with teeth. Someone who didn't just take the hit and crawl away. I sat down with a pen and paper, not to write another note, but to make a list. My hand was steady now. No more trembling. No more hoping. Just clarity. I would give him one final gift, not wrapped in foil or tied with a ribbon. This one would be cold, calculated, and unforgettable. Because if Daniel thought that moment in the office was the end of the story, he was wrong. It was just the crack that split the ground open. What came next would be the real shock. And I already knew exactly how it would start. Sleep never came that night. I lay in bed, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling like it might offer some kind of answer. But I didn't want comfort anymore. I wanted control. By morning, my tears had dried into something solid, something focused. I opened Daniel's laptop, the one he forgot to log out of before leaving for work, and started digging. Emails, messages, calendar events that didn't quite add up. It was all there, waiting, like breadcrumbs he'd never expected anyone to follow. I didn't just want proof. I wanted a pattern. I mapped out dates and times, hotel bookings tucked under vague client dinners, texts that read like they came from a romance novel no one should be living while married. He had been so careless, so smug. And Olivia? She wasn't innocent either. I found her messages too, always sent after hours, always signed with little hearts. I read everyone. Not to torture myself, but to sharpen my strategy. And slowly, a plan began to take shape, clear as glass and twice as dangerous. By the third cup of coffee, I had everything I needed. But I wasn't going to confront him. Not yet. That would be too easy. Too quick. No, I wanted it to sting. To echo. That's when I thought of Olivia's husband. A man I'd met only once, at some company picnic, quiet and polite. The kind of man who looked like he still believed in honesty. I tracked him down through a shared address in an email thread. Then I sent him a message. Just one line. We should talk. I think we've both been sleeping next to strangers. He replied within the hour. His name was Aaron. The message was short, cautious, but something in it told me he already knew. Maybe not the whole truth, but enough to feel the tremble under his feet. We met that afternoon at a cafe just far enough from the office, the kind of place where no one asked questions. When he walked in, I recognized the same look I'd worn in the mirror the night before. Hollowed-out shock, barely hiding the storm beneath. We didn't exchange small talk. There was no need. I slid a manila folder across the table. He didn't open it right away, just looked at me, jaw tense, eyes heavy. Thank you, he said quietly, and I understood it wasn't gratitude. It was grief. Then he flipped it open and saw what I'd collected. Printed screenshots, overlapping calendars, images I never wanted to see again. He didn't flinch. Just nodded once, like this was the final confirmation of something he'd been trying not to believe. And then he asked the same question I'd been circling for hours. What do we do now? I didn't smile. I didn't blink. I told him calmly that they didn't deserve privacy, not after the way they'd violated our trust in the shadows. I wanted this to be public, not dramatic, not petty, visible. Corporate policy was clear. No undisclosed relationships, especially between manager and subordinate. I had the handbook saved on my desktop. Aaron agreed. They won't see it coming, he said, voice low and steady. I nodded. Exactly. And that's when we began building the perfect reveal. The days that followed felt different. I wasn't waiting around anymore, hoping he'd come home with some pathetic excuse. I had purpose now. Every free moment was spent organizing, refining, preparing. Aaron and I shared information quietly, like co-conspirators in a silent war. We combed through office chatter, policy memos, even social media breadcrumbs. It was astonishing how reckless they had been. Lunch breaks that lined up too often, business trips that mysteriously overlapped, whispers from coworkers that suddenly made perfect sense. At night, I would lie in bed, phone in hand, going over the timeline one more time. I wasn't obsessing. I was orchestrating. And in those hours, I started to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. Power. Not the loud, ego-driven kind. This was quieter, cleaner. I wasn't broken anymore. I was building something. A reckoning. And the thought of Daniel standing there, blindsided and speechless, gave me just enough warmth to sleep soundly for the first time in weeks. The final detail fell into place when the company announced their annual gala, a celebration of milestones, of family values, and leadership excellence. It was perfect. A stage, an audience, and both of them dressed to impress. I RSVP'd with a smile and picked out a dress that made me feel like the woman I used to be. Before lies, before silence, before betrayal. This wasn't just revenge. It was a reminder of who I am, and exactly what I'm capable of when pushed too far. The night of the gala arrived like a performance I'd been rehearsing in my mind for days. The venue was glowing, chandeliers, soft jazz, glasses clinking, polite laughter echoing through the hall. I stepped out of the car and into the cool air, heels clicking on the pavement, heart steady. My dress shimmered under the lights, tailored just enough to remind Daniel what he'd lost, and what he'd underestimated. As I walked in, heads turned. Not because of the dress, really, but because I looked unshaken, controlled, radiant. Daniel didn't see me right away. He was near the stage, playing the charming executive, arm draped casually around Olivia's lower back. She looked exactly like someone who believed she'd gotten away with something. They both did. I smiled at that, not bitterly, but knowingly. Because tonight, I wasn't just his wife. I was the storm they didn't bother to check the forecast for. I greeted a few familiar faces, all of them commenting on how lovely I looked. "You're glowing," someone said. If only they knew why. I waited patiently through the speeches, the toasts, the polite pats on the back. My moment was coming, and I wasn't about to rush it. When Daniel saw me from across the room, his smile faltered just slightly. Olivia turned too, her hand still on his arm. I raised my glass in their direction. Not a toast, a signal. I wasn't there to make a scene. I was there to set the stage on fire. And when the microphone was offered for a few words from the executive's wife, I stepped forward with a warmth they didn't yet know was laced with gasoline. I took the microphone with a practiced smile, the kind that looks soft on the surface but hides steel underneath. The room was hushed, polite, waiting. I scanned the crowd, pausing just long enough on Daniel's face to let him know. This wasn't going to be the toast he expected. "Good evening," I began, voice calm, almost gentle. I wasn't planning to speak tonight, but when you're married to someone as dedicated as Daniel, sometimes you feel inspired to bring a little something sweet. There was a murmur of laughter, light and unsuspecting. I turned slightly toward him. "Daniel, I brought you something, just like last week. Except this time." I reached into my clutch and pressed a button on the small remote hidden inside. "It's not cake?" Behind me, the screen on stage lit up, and silence fell over the room like a dropped curtain. Image after image appeared. Hotel entrances, kisses behind office doors, texts that read, "She'll never know." The slideshow moved slowly, deliberately. No need to rush. Gasps echoed through the room. Chairs shifted. Someone dropped a glass. I didn't flinch. I looked right at him as his face drained of color, his mouth parting like he wanted to form words and couldn't. Olivia beside him was already trembling, reaching out to steady herself. And right on cue, the ballroom doors opened. And there was Aaron. Dressed sharp, jaw clenched, holding up printed emails like evidence in a courtroom. His eyes met mine. A nod. Just one. The truth was out, and there was no crawling back from it. No one moved for a moment. It was the kind of silence that holds weight, the stunned, suffocating quiet before reputations crumble. Daniel stood there, still frozen, blinking as if he could somehow erase what everyone had just seen. Olivia's hands were shaking. Her boss, her colleagues, even her friends from HR stared in horror, no one coming to her defense. I stepped down from the stage slowly, heels tapping like punctuation. I didn't need to scream. The images had already said everything. I passed Daniel as I walked off, and for a second, he tried to speak. A whisper of my name like it still belonged to him. I didn't stop. I didn't look at him. He had lost the right to my attention the second he gave it to someone else behind a locked door. Olivia turned away, burying her face in her hands. Aaron stood a few feet back, arms folded, watching it all unfold with the same stillness I felt inside. We had done what we came to do, not for vengeance, for truth, for clarity, for closure. By the time I reached the exit, the buzz behind me had turned into chaos. Whispers, gasps, people pulling out their phones, eyes darting between the stage and the accused. But I didn't need to see it. I already knew. The masks were off. The damage was done. And what I left behind in that ballroom wasn't just a broken man and a scandal. I left behind a chapter, a version of myself who stayed silent. She was gone. What came next? That was mine to write. The morning after the gala, the headlines in Daniel's office inbox spoke louder than any apology ever could. Executive under review. Internal breach of conduct. Possible termination pending. HR didn't waste time. Olivia was escorted out before lunch, her badge deactivated, her email erased. Daniel was placed on leave. Indefinitely. Suddenly, all those long nights at the office didn't look so noble anymore. The same people who once admired him now avoided his gaze in the hallways, as if betrayal might be contagious. I watched it all unfold from a distance, not with bitterness, but with a strange calm. I wasn't proud of what happened. But I wasn't ashamed of it either. He made choices. I simply removed the curtain. The whispers didn't scare me. The judgment didn't touch me. If anything, there was a quiet strength in the way I carried myself through it. Not as a woman scorned, but as a woman done being dismissed. I filed for divorce the next day. No screaming, no theatrics, just signatures and silence. Daniel tried to call. Once. Twice. I let it ring. Then I blocked the number. I had nothing left to say to a man who only listened when the whole room was watching. I didn't need closure. I had truth. And with that truth came freedom. Legal counsel took care of the rest. What I was owed, I claimed. The house, the car, the accounts he never thought I'd touch. I didn't take it out of spite. I took it because I deserved it, because he forgot who I was. And I just reminded him. People always assume you'll fall apart after something like that you'll crawl into bed and stay there for weeks, crying over what used to be. But grief doesn't always look the way people expect. Sometimes it shows up in the grocery store aisle when you realize you don't need to buy his favorite cereal anymore. Sometimes it's in the quiet of your living room, noticing how much more peaceful the house feels without his phone buzzing at midnight. And sometimes it's just relief that he's gone. I began reclaiming the little things first. Playlists, pillows, passwords. I repainted the bedroom, donated his old books, threw out the mug he always left by the sink. It wasn't anger that fueled me. It was clarity. Every drawer I emptied, every closet I cleared, felt like I was making space. For breath. For light. For me. The woman who had stayed too quiet for too long was finally letting herself be loud, even if only in the privacy of her own home. And that silence? It didn't ache anymore. It healed. I met friends for lunch again, started saying yes to things I used to turn down. I even signed up for a baking class, not because I needed to learn, but because I wanted to share something I loved without anyone taking it for granted. The instructor smiled when I walked in, and for the first time in what felt like years, I smiled back without faking it. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine again. And that more than any revenge or settlement was the sweetest part of all. A few weeks later, I found myself at a little cafe downtown. Nothing fancy, just a quiet spot with good coffee and a window seat I used to daydream in. I sat across from my best friend, a slice of chocolate cake in front of me, the kind I used to bake for him. But this time, it wasn't for anyone else, just me. She raised her eyebrows with a grin. "Dessert before lunch?" she asked. I smiled as I took the first bite. "I've earned it," I said. And I meant it. There was something poetic about it all. How the story that started with a pie ended with a piece of cake. Not because I needed sweetness, but because I had taken back the meaning of it. I wasn't mourning anymore. I wasn't waiting for an apology or some miracle of closure. I had already walked through the fire and come out clean. Lighter, stronger, and more certain than ever that love, real love, starts with loving yourself enough not to settle for crumbs. I looked out the window as the world passed by, feeling no rush, no ache, no unfinished business. Just peace. I leaned back in my chair, took another bite, and laughed softly to myself. He always thought I was just the woman who brought dessert. What he never realized, what she never saw coming, is that I was also the woman who brought the reckoning.
My name is Nicole Fields. I'm 32 years old, and until recently, I thought I had the kind of life most people would call stable. I had a solid job as a project manager, enough to pay the bills and buy us a modest home in a decent neighborhood. For a long time, that was enough for me. I thought it was enough for him, too. Daniel, 31. My husband of 8 years, used to be the kind of man who laughed at bad sitcoms with me on Friday nights and fell asleep holding my hand after we'd eaten takeout pad thai. He was warm, ordinary mine. But things changed. It started when Daniel got that new job at a boutique. Not just any boutique, but the kind that didn't bother with price tags where they offered champagne while you browsed. That's where he met them Carter and his glittering entourage. The kind of people who summered in the Hamptons and spoke of yachts as if they were weekend toys. At first I thought it was harmless. Daniel came home with new phrases. "We're summering." It's all about sprezzatura, words he'd never said before, rolling off his tongue like he'd been rehearsing in a mirror. He started comparing. My Toyota Corolla was practical, while Carter's Porsche was a work of art. My carefully chosen jewelry was sweet, while Carter's gifts to his girlfriend were timeless. I tried not to care. I told myself love wasn't about competition. But little by little, I felt him slipping away, like I was holding on to someone who no longer wanted to be held. Then came the Vanderbilt summer party. I knew the moment we walked into that sprawling glass and steel mansion that I was prey in the lion's den. Everyone looked like they had stepped straight out of a magazine spread, tailored suits, gleaming dresses, laughter sharp as champagne bubbles. My best dress suddenly felt like a high school project compared to theirs. Daniel didn't notice me shrinking. Or maybe he did, and didn't care. His attention was locked on Carter, orbiting him like a planet desperate for its sun. I tried to blend into the background, clutching a flute of something that tasted more like vinegar than wine. My pulse hammered as Carter swaggered over Daniel, trailing behind him. Nicole, Carter said smoothly, eyes glinting like a shark's. He looked me up and down with a smile that was all blade, no warmth. "That's an interesting choice of dress." Daniel chuckled beside him. "She tries her best," he said lightly, like I wasn't standing right there. The words sliced deeper than I expected. He'd never humiliated me in public before, not until that moment. "Stop, Daniel," I murmured, my face burning. But he wasn't finished. His smile curved into something cruel, rehearsed. "Sweetheart, Carter's just used to a different league of taste. You know how it is." And then in front of everyone, he leaned close and whispered loud enough for the surrounding circle to hear. "I look at him, what he has, what he represents. and I look at you. It's just not the same league. The room tilted. For a second, I thought I'd drop my glass. The humiliation wasn't sharp like a slap, it was slow, a burn spreading under my skin. Conversations around us carried on, but I felt their eyes, their smirks, their delight at my downfall. I wanted to scream, to cry, to ask him how he could throw away years of love for the approval of strangers. But in that instant, something inside me snapped clean. Instead, I simply said, okay, just that, one word. And then I turned, walked away, and left Daniel standing there. The silence that followed me out felt heavier than any insult. What Daniel didn't realize was that in humiliating me so publicly, he'd given me something back: clarity. And clarity once found doesn't let you go. The morning after the Vanderbilt party, Daniel was gone. No slammed doors, no fight, just silence. His side of the closet half empty, a suitcase missing, and a folded note on the kitchen counter written in his tight, slanted handwriting. I'm staying at Carter's guest house for a while. Don't wait up. That was it. 8 years reduced to one line. I stood there barefoot on the cold tile, staring at the note while the refrigerator hummed beside me. I wanted to feel rage. I wanted to cry until I couldn't breathe. But instead I felt nothing. A vast, hollow calm, like my body had gone into shock. The house was too quiet after that. At night I'd lie awake listening for the familiar rhythm of Daniel's footsteps pacing when he was restless, or the way he'd hum under his breath in the shower. Now there was only the hum of the fridge, the occasional creak of pipes. The silence pressed down like a weight. I didn't smash our wedding photos. I didn't drown myself in wine. I just went numb. Days blurred. I went to work, came home reheated leftovers, scrolled through mindless TV without hearing a word. The absence of his presence was worse than his betrayal. Then the text started. Not from him, he was too busy parading his new life online, but from his new circle. Nicole, I heard what happened. I'm so sorry. You two were just different worlds. Carter is more Daniel's speed. XOXO, Stephanie. Hey, don't be upset. It's probably for the best. You'll find someone who fits you. Melanie. Each message was polished with fake sympathy, but underneath it, I could hear the laughter, the thrill of gossip. They didn't care about me. I was just the tragic subplot in their champagne-soaked drama. I deleted every message without responding. The only person who showed up for me was Mia, my best friend since college. She didn't send me hollow texts. She arrived on Friday night with a 6-pack and a tub of mint chocolate chip ice cream, dropping both onto my coffee table with a thud. You look like death, she said, plopping onto my couch and pulling the lid off the ice cream. Thanks, I muttered, curling up under a blanket. She handed me a spoon. Listen, you didn't fail Nicole. He did. He traded a diamond for cubic zirconia. That's on him. I let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. A diamond. Please, I'm more like costume jewelry. Then you're the kind people actually wear because it means something, she shot back. Not the flashy crap that falls apart in 2 weeks. Her words pierced the numbness like a pin through fabric. For the first time in days, I felt something, not rage, not despair, but the faintest spark of defiance. Still, the nights were hard. Lying in bed, I'd replay his words, not the same league. I'd stare at the ceiling and wonder when exactly I had stopped being enough. I thought about calling him, demanding an explanation, begging him to see me. But every time my hand hovered over my phone, I remembered the look in his eyes at that party, the hunger for status, the way he glowed in Carter's shadow. He hadn't just left me. He'd left himself behind too, chasing an illusion. And somewhere deep down I knew chasing after him would mean erasing myself completely. So instead I sat in the silent spooned ice cream straight from the carton and let the stillness wrap around me like a cocoon. It was the loneliest place I'd ever been. But it was also where the first cracks of something else began to form. Not yet hope, not yet strength, just the quiet awareness that I was still here, breathing, existing. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to start again. The silence that once pressed down on me like a weight became something else after a few weeks. It stopped feeling like a tomb and started feeling like space. Empty, yes, lonely, sometimes crushing, but space nonetheless. And in that space I began to breathe again. It didn't happen dramatically. There was no epiphany, no triumphant movie montage. It started small. One morning, I woke up and realized I hadn't eaten anything but takeout and ice cream in days. My stomach churned. I walked into the kitchen, pulled out a dusty cookbook from the shelf, and tried to make scrambled eggs. They burned, stuck to the pan like glue. I cursed, laughed, and tried again. The second attempt was edible. Barely. but it was mine. That night, for the first time since Daniel left, I felt the faintest flicker of pride. From there, little things followed. I joined a gym, not one of those glittering clubs Daniel and his friends adored, but the no-frills one down the street. The kind that smelled faintly of rubber mats and disinfectant wipes. At first, I hated every second. My legs ached, my arms trembled. Sweat stung my eyes, but there was something grounding about putting one foot in front of the other on a treadmill, something honest about muscles burning from effort I chose. Each mile was mine, each rep was mine. At work, too, things shifted. For years, I had rushed through my projects, always distracted, always glancing at the clock, worried about what mood Daniel would be in when I got home. But now, there was only me. I threw myself into a major project that had been languishing, pouring in ideas I'd been too timid to suggest before. I stayed late, not because I had to, but because I wanted to see what I was capable of without someone else's shadow looming over me. One afternoon, my boss, Brenda, stopped by my desk. She was sharp-eyed, blunt, the kind of woman who noticed everything. "You've been on fire lately, Nicole," she said, tapping her pen against a stack of reports I'd submitted. "Everything okay at home?" I hesitated. The old me would have deflected, lied, kept my private pain hidden, but something in her steady gaze told me she'd see through it anyway. "Better than okay," I said quietly. "Just focused." Her lips curved into a knowing smile. "Keep it up. People higher up are noticing." I blinked at her, stunned. For the first time in months, the word future didn't feel like a threat. Meanwhile, Mia kept showing up, dragging me to trivia nights and insisting I join her and her boyfriend for board games. "You can't sit in that house forever," she told me one evening, shoving a glass of wine into my hand. "You'll turn into a ghost, and ghosts don't get promotions or revenge bodies." "Revenge bodies," I arched a brow. She grinned. "Nothing says screw you like looking fabulous when they expect you to crumble." I laughed for real that night, the sound startling in its freedom. But it wasn't about revenge. Not really. It was about rediscovering myself in the quiet spaces Daniel had left behind. And yet, in those quiet spaces, I also began to hear whispers. Little things, an overheard conversation at the gym, a comment on social media that suggested Carter's wealth wasn't as bulletproof as it seemed, rumors of debt of family money that might not be flowing anymore. I tucked the whispers away. I didn't dwell on them. But part of me couldn't help wondering if Daniel had traded me for a dream that was already crumbling. For now, though, it didn't matter. Because for the first time in a long time, my life, small, quiet, ordinary, was mine. And that was enough. It started with a text. Unknown number. "Hey, heard you got that promotion. Congrats. That's really great." I stared at the message thumb hovering over the screen. No name, but I didn't need one. The tone, the fake casualness, the forced warmth, it was unmistakably Daniel's. I deleted it without replying. 2 days later, another number popped up. "Nicole, I made a mistake, a huge one." "Carter, everything he said was a lie. Please, can we talk?" My chest tightened, not with longing, but with an odd kind of annoyance. How dare he think he could walk back into my life like nothing had happened? That he could humiliate me, abandon me, and then expect me to be his safety net when the glitter turned to dust. I took a screenshot, dropped it into a folder I labeled "Remember," and blocked the number. The messages kept coming. Each one from a new number, each one swinging wildly between guilt, desperation, and anger. "I miss you. What we had was real. So you're just going to ignore me after everything we had. The least you could do is be a decent human being." That last one made me laugh out loud, a sharp, bitter sound that echoed in my empty kitchen. Decent human being. From the man who compared me to Carter's wealth like I was some cheap knockoff handbag. No. The final blow didn't come from Daniel himself, but from his mother. She called me one Sunday afternoon, her voice dripping with syrupy concern. "Nicole, sweetheart," she cooed, as if she hadn't spent years favoring Daniel in every argument. "How are you holding up?" "I'm fine, Mrs. Peterson. What do you need?" "I just spoke to Daniel," she pressed on, ignoring my flat tone. "He's a mess. That Carter character was a monster, a complete fraud. He lied about everything, his money, his family, all of it. Daniel didn't know. He was tricked. You can't hold a little mistake against him forever, dear. You two had so many good years." Her words slithered through the line like smoke trying to suffocate me with guilt. Once they might have worked. Once I might have bent softened, told myself Daniel deserved forgiveness. But not now. I took a slow breath, steadying the tremor of rage that wanted to break free. "Mrs. Peterson," I said, my voice calm, almost gentle. "Daniel and I are divorced. My obligation to him and to you is 0. Please do not contact me again." The silence on the other end was delicious. When she finally sputtered, "Well, I hung up." The click of the call ending felt like a door slamming shut. For the first time since that awful night at the party, I felt clean. Daniel wasn't crawling back because he loved me. He was crawling back because his shiny dream had shattered, and he wanted me to glue the pieces together. But I wasn't his glue anymore. I wasn't anything to him anymore. And that truth was more powerful than any revenge could ever be. The news came in fragments, whispers, carried by people who once couldn't stop bragging about Carter. First, it was Mia sliding her phone across the cafe table toward me one afternoon. "Look," she said. "Recognize anyone?" On the screen was a grainy tabloid-style photo. Carter looking less like a golden god and more like a man cornered. His hair was unkempt, his suit ill-fitting, his eyes hollow. The caption, "Businessman Carter Reynolds faces mounting debt allegations." I scrolled through the article, pulse quickening. The mansion rented, the cars leased. The yacht and the villa in Saint-Tropez fabrications stitched together through photos and bravado. And his empire nothing but credit card debt and smoke. For weeks the gossip multiplied. Carter's family had cut him off years ago. His so-called friends, the same people who once looked at Daniel like he was royalty, just for being in Carter's orbit, scattered the moment the champagne stopped flowing. And Daniel, he wasn't collateral damage, he was a casualty. One evening, Mia leaned back in her chair, swirling her wine as she delivered the final piece. He's living in a one-bedroom apartment on the east side now. Lost his job at the boutique. Word is Carter dropped him the moment things got ugly. I stared at the candle, flickering between us. My chest tightened, not with joy, not with pity, with something sharper, clarity. Daniel hadn't left me for Carter. He had left me for the idea of Carter, the illusion of wealth, the performance of prestige. And now that illusion had collapsed, leaving him stranded with nothing. Once I might have pictured this moment, dreamed of confronting him, of making him see what he'd thrown away. But now I didn't feel the urge. I didn't need to stand in front of him and say, "I told you so," because the truth was already written all over his life in the eviction notice taped to Carter's mansion door, in the hushed whispers of friends turned strangers, in the silence of a phone that no longer buzzed with invitations. Daniel had chosen the glitter, and when the glitter washed off, all that remained was rust. I didn't celebrate, I didn't gloat, I just sat back, breathed in the calm air of my own small, steady life, and thought, sometimes karma doesn't roar, sometimes it whispers, and when it whispers, it's even louder. But deep down I knew this wasn't over, because men like Daniel, desperate and titled, don't just vanish into the ruins they've made. They crawl back one last time, and I had a feeling that moment was coming. 6 months after the Vanderbilt party, Mia dragged me to an art gallery opening. Her coworker's cousin was showing pottery, or maybe abstract paintings. I wasn't listening. I just knew I had no excuse to say no, and besides, I'd bought myself a new suit dress. Not for Daniel, not for revenge, for me. The gallery buzzed with the kind of people who pretended to debate art, but really just wanted to be photographed beside it. I sipped sparkling water and let the chatter wash over me. And then I felt it, that prickling at the back of my neck, the sensation of being watched. I turned and froze. Daniel, but not the Daniel I remembered. This one looked smaller. His expensive clothes had been traded for a too-thin jacket. His hair was messy, his skin pale. He carried himself like a man dragging chains, invisible to everyone but him. Our eyes met. His widened with shock, then softened into something desperate. Hope. He wove through the crowd until he stood before me. His cologne was gone, replaced with the faint, cloying scent of cheap drugstore spray. "Nicole." His voice cracked like he hadn't said my name in months. "You look incredible." I gave him a polite smile, neutral, detached. "Hello, Daniel." He flinched at my tone, but pressed on words, tumbling. I was a fool. Carter, he used me. They all did. It was lies, all of it. But us, what we had, that was real. I miss you. I miss us. I said nothing. Silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. Around us, the party carried on, oblivious. He swallowed hard, searching my face. Can we try again? Finally, I spoke. Calm. Final. That chapter is closed, Daniel. I've moved on. You should too. His expression cracked. Hope curdled into anger. You don't even care, do you? After everything, not even a little. I held his gaze utterly unshaken. No, I don't. The truth hung there, sharp and undeniable. For the first time he looked at me, not as the woman he'd abandoned, but as a stranger. And maybe that's all I had ever been to him in the end, someone to use until something shinier came along. I straightened, smoothing my dress. I hope you find what you're looking for, Daniel. Excuse me. I turned and walked away toward Mia, who pretended to study a lopsided vase but kept one eye on me. I slipped back into her orbit as if nothing had happened. Behind me, Daniel didn't follow. Later, Mia told me he stood there for a full minute, staring at the empty space I'd left behind before slinking out of the gallery alone. And that was the last time I ever saw him. The thing is, Daniel was wrong that night in Carter's mansion. I did understand. Perfectly. He wanted a life that sparkled on the outside, even if it was hollow within. And he got exactly what he asked for. Me, I chose something else. Something real. Quiet mornings, honest work. Friendships that weren't about status. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't glamorous. But it was mine, and Daniel finally completely was irrelevant to it. My name is Jean Lewis. I'm 28 years old, and this is the story of how I learned that sometimes silence speaks louder than love. For most of my life, I believed stability was the highest form of devotion, that showing up, keeping promises, and remaining calm in storms was what made a person worthy of love. I thought that if I could be dependable enough, strong enough, steady enough, then nothing would shake the foundation of a relationship. I thought wrong. Ethan and I met during our last year of college. I was a finance major already locked into a job offer before graduation with color-coded planners and a 5-year trajectory mapped out in my head. Ethan was the opposite, an art student with paint on his jeans, messy curls, and a voice that could command a room without trying. He was magnetic, unpredictable in a way that made everyone lean toward him as though they might catch a spark. We seemed like opposites, but for a while we fit. I was structure, he was chaos, and somehow the combination worked. The first 2 years were good, better than good. I covered rent when he was between jobs, ordered cheap wine for his gallery showings, and even built him a small website to showcase his work when he couldn't afford one. Ethan would paint until 2 in the morning, and I'd bring him tea, rubbing his aching shoulders until he fell asleep on the couch. I thought we were building something real a life, where my steadiness could anchor his wildness. When we graduated, we moved in together. I started full-time at a mid-sized financial firm. Nothing glamorous, but the climb was steady. Ethan bounced between waitering gigs, internships at galleries that never paid, and eventually landed part-time at a boutique art space. I didn't mind supporting him. I thought that's what love was giving when your partner was struggling, knowing someday it might balance out. At first, Ethan appreciated it. He would tell me I made him feel safe, grounded. He'd call me his rock. And for a while, I believed that was enough. But appreciation has a way of curdling into resentment. It started small, a comment here and there. You're too comfortable just working your 9 to 5. Don't you ever want to do something big? You're always so calm. It's like nothing touches you. I'd laugh it off, tell myself he was just stressed. Artists went through phases, right? But those words began to sting in places I didn't want to admit, because part of me feared he was right. Maybe my calm wasn't strength. Maybe to him it was boredom. And yet I stayed steady. I kept showing up. I told myself this was what partners did, that if I kept pouring in enough patience, enough love, eventually he'd stop seeing me as invisible. But the truth, the cracks had already started forming. And deep down, I think Ethan knew it too. Ethan's world started to expand in ways that no longer included me. It began with his new circle at the gallery. Younger artists, loud, reckless, endlessly online. They thrived on late-night pop-ups, rooftop mixers, underground shows with hazy lighting and cheap beer. Every invite seemed to mysteriously exclude me. I told myself it was fine. He needed his own space. Not everything had to include me. But each time he slipped out the door, I felt a quiet ache, the kind you don't talk about because you're afraid of sounding needy. Then came Isla. She was new at the gallery, a sculptor from Portland, with dyed hair, chipped black nail polish, and a confidence that came off as effortless rebellion. Ethan's friends adored her, like she was some underground icon they had just discovered. The first time I met her, I'd stopped by the gallery to pick Ethan up. Isla was leaning against a pedestal, talking with her hands, rings flashing under the dim light. She looked at me the way you'd look at a substitute teacher, polite but disinterested. She didn't even shake my hand. Just a half smile and a dismissive, "Oh, so you're Ethan's girlfriend." Like my presence was an afterthought, like being his partner was a role that didn't matter. After that, her name became a regular guest in our home. Isla thinks I should experiment with bigger canvases. Isla says my work has depth most people don't notice. Isla and I just see art the same way. At first, I brushed it off. I had never been the jealous type, but then Ethan's habits began to change. He started hiding his phone when I walked by. Texts that made him smile ended abruptly when I asked who it was. Nights he used to spend painting at home turned into hours out with friends, coming back with incense and beer on his clothes. When I asked how his night went, he'd shrug. It was fine. Don't worry about it. The more I tried to reach for answers, the more he made me feel like the crazy one. Seriously, Jean. You're being paranoid. I thought you were more secure than that. That stung. He knew I avoided drama, that I prided myself on being composed. He used it like a blade, cutting me down for even daring to question him. So I stopped asking. I told myself trust meant silence. But my gut twisted with every dismissive laugh, every hidden screen. And then the truth slipped into my hands, casually, accidentally, as betrayal often does. It was a Sunday afternoon. I was scrolling Instagram stories when one from Jess, an old college friend of Ethan's, caught my eye. A rooftop bar, a clinking toast laughter echoing through the background. I tapped lazily until the fourth clip froze me cold. There was Ethan, sitting beside Isla. Her hand rested on his thigh, his arm stretched behind her, claiming space that used to belong to me. The angle wasn't even deliberate. Jess had been filming the toast, but it was enough. I stared at that image until the edges of the screen blurred. Then I took a screenshot. My hand shook, but my face stayed still. And I didn't say a word. Not that night, not the next. Not until I was sure I could look him in the eye and let him lie to me before I walked away for good. 2 days. That's how long I waited after the rooftop story. 2 days of silence, pretending everything was normal, while my mind replayed that image like a film reel I couldn't turn off. I wanted to see him lie. To watch his face, his mouth, his eyes when I asked. I wanted the confirmation, not just suspicion. Tuesday night, we were both home. He was curled up on the couch, phone in hand, scrolling with that casual smirk. I sat across from him, eyes fixed on the TV, but not seeing a thing. Every once in a while, he'd glance at me, like checking if I was still in my quiet little box, dependable Jean. Steady Jean, the girlfriend who never made a fuss. I waited until the movie credits rolled before I spoke. So I asked casually, how was the gallery mixer Saturday? He didn't even look up. Fine. Kind of boring, honestly. Just artists and staff, right? Yeah. Why? I reached into my phone, pulled up the screenshot, and held it out between us. The glow of the screen cut the space like a blade. His smile faltered. For a second, his eyes registered the truth, her hand, his arm, the intimacy. Then, like a mask sliding into place, he scoffed. Wow, so now you're spying on me. I laughed once sharp. Spying, Jess posted it. You just forgot she follows me too. He leaned back, running a hand through his hair theatrics in full swing. First of all, that's out of context. We were just sitting close. It was loud. Her hand was on your thigh, Ethan? So what? His voice snapped, defensive. You never touch me like that anymore. The words sliced through me. For a heartbeat, I couldn't breathe. You never want me to anymore, I said quietly. Don't flip this on me. He jumped up, pacing like he was preparing a speech for a courtroom. You know what? Maybe if you actually made me feel something, I wouldn't need that attention. My jaw tightened. So you do need it from her. He stopped halfway between the living room and the kitchen. His chest heaved. Isla sees me, Jean. She listens. She pushes me creatively. With you, I feel managed, handled, like a task you check off every day. Every memory, nights of carrying him through rejections, saving money to cover his rent, listening, when he cursed the world, all of it shrank to dust in the shadow of those words. And then came the smirk. That cruel little twist of his lips, the one that said he wasn't just admitting betrayal, he was proud of it. If you were really a woman, he sneered, you'd fight for me. Something inside me stilled. He expected tears, screams, maybe a desperate plea. A performance he could measure his worth against. But instead I stood, slowly, deliberately. I walked past him, opened the hall closet, and pulled out my old backpack. I began placing a few essentials inside a sweater, wallet, charger. Each item folded neatly as if order could protect me from the storm. What are you doing? His voice cracked somewhere between confusion and panic. Getting out of your way. Wow. His laugh was sharp, mocking. So that's it. You're just going to leave. No fight, no nothing. I zipped the bag, swung it over my shoulder, and faced him. Real strength isn't clinging to a liar, I said softly. It's walking away. For the first time that night, his mask slipped. Shock flickered across his face, quickly replaced by rage. You're being so dramatic. No, I met his eyes with steady calm. I'm being done. And with that, I turned, opened in the door, and stepped into the night without looking back. I didn't cry that night. Not when I walked out. Not when I drove across town and crashed on my brother's couch. Not even when Ethan's first text lit up my phone. Jean, you're overreacting. We didn't sleep together. Jean, please don't make this worse than it needs to be. I powered the phone off and slept harder than I had in weeks. The next morning, I moved money out of our shared account. I sent a polite email to our landlord requesting my name be taken off the lease. My things, the few I cared about, fit into 2 suitcases. I didn't shout, I didn't post online, I didn't tell mutual friends my side. I just disappeared. And in that silence, something powerful happened. At first, Ethan didn't notice, or maybe he thought he could wait me out. Week 1 passed with no contact beyond those texts. I imagined he expected me to cool down to crawl back with a, "Can we talk?" or "I just want closure." That's what he'd gotten from others before me. But my silence unsettled him more than anger ever could. By week 2, he was loud again, not with me, but online. Stories of him and Isla at rooftop bars, cocktails, raised high captions dripping with bravado living, not apologizing. In one photo, Isla leaned into him, laughing, like nothing in the world had consequences. I won't lie. Seeing it clenched my jaw. For a moment, I wondered if walking away had really been strength or just cowardice. But then I reminded myself I was no longer in the game. And that's when the cracks began to show. The flood of couple photos slowed. Posts shifted from champagne to cryptic captions. People always disappoint you. Some things aren't worth saving. By week 4, Ethan wasn't posting Isla at all. The truth came from Jess, the same friend whose rooftop video had exposed him. She messaged me out of the blue. "Hey, Jean, just checking in. You doing okay?" I kept it short. "Fine, thanks." Then came her second message. "I didn't know he was seeing Isla when I posted that. I'm sorry you had to find out like that." I didn't respond, but she kept going. For what it's worth, I don't think things are going great. He's not what she thought. He's angry, controlling, always starting fights at the gallery. Rumor is he threw a stool at someone after they criticized his work. I stared at those words. Part of me wanted to laugh bitter hollow. Ethan had traded my calm for chaos, and now chaos was devouring him whole. By week 5, Isla disappeared from his feed entirely. No tags, no mentions. Just Ethan alone posting vague quotes about betrayal. And I sat in my new apartment, small, clean mine, with bare walls and secondhand furniture. For the first time in years, there was no one storming in at 2 a.m., no phone to hide, no smirk daring me to beg. The silence was deafening at first, but soon it felt like freedom. Week 10. By then I had almost stopped checking for his shadow. My days were steady work, workouts, small dinners with friends who never made me question my worth. I was starting to breathe again, without realizing I'd been holding my breath for years. Then one Saturday afternoon I saw him. Ethan was sitting on the front steps of my building. Hoodie pulled tight, shoulders slumped. For a moment I didn't recognize him. Not because his face had changed, but because his confidence was gone, deflated like a balloon that had lost its air. He stood quickly when he saw me, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Hey," he said. "Figured you wouldn't answer if I texted again." I gripped the grocery bags in my hands tighter. "You figured right." "Please," he stepped closer, blocking my way. "Just 5 minutes." I didn't want a scene in front of neighbors. With a sigh, I set my bags down and crossed my arms. 5 minutes. Talk. He looked down at the concrete, then back at me with a practiced, wounded expression. "I messed up. I know I did. But you didn't even try to stop me. You didn't fight for me, Jean." I almost laughed. The words were absurd, but the ache behind them was real. Fight for you. You made it clear what you wanted. Isla, the chaos, the sparks. Remember. He flinched as though hearing his own choices spoken aloud burned. "I thought she got me," he admitted. His voice cracked. "But she doesn't. She doesn't care. She tears me down. I miss how safe I felt with you, how steady things were." There it was, the classic plea. I'd seen it in stories online 100 times, didn't realize what I had until it was gone. I shook my head slowly. "You didn't want steady. You called it boring. You wanted chaos. And now that chaos has a cost, you come crawling back." "I'm saying I made a mistake," he insisted, stepping forward. "Can't you see that you said you loved me?" I did. I cut him off, past tense. His jaw tightened, desperation slipping into anger. "So that's it. You're just going to throw away 3 years like it meant nothing." I held his gaze steady as ever. "You threw it away, Ethan. I just accepted it." For a moment, silence stretched between us. His shoulders sagged, eyes hollow. He looked like he might cry or lash out. But instead he shoved his hands into his pockets and muttered, "Guess I was right. You never fight for anything." I leaned down, picked up my groceries, and stepped past him. My voice was calm, but each word struck with finality. Love shouldn't need a battlefield, Ethan. It should feel like home. I unlocked the door, walked inside, and closed it without another glance. He didn't follow. 6 months later, life had shifted in ways I hadn't thought possible. My apartment no longer felt like a temporary escape. It felt like mine. Work with steady promotions on the horizon. I laughed more, slept better, even started hiking again on weekends. The silence that once scared me had become a sanctuary. So when the wedding invitation arrived, I almost said no. It was for Tyler, an old college friend. Part of me dreaded the small talk, the reunions, the possibility of bumping into people who still knew me as Ethan's girlfriend. But my closest friends convinced me, you deserve a night to celebrate something good. The venue was beautiful, an outdoor garden with string lights woven through tall trees, linen suits, and flowing dresses swaying under warm air. For once, I wasn't walking into a space carrying Ethan's chaos on my shoulders. I was just Jean Hole on my own. Halfway through a drink at the reception, I saw him. Ethan stood near the back patio, nursing a glass of wine, like it was the only thing keeping him upright. His once bright eyes were dull, shoulders slouched. Even his clothes hung differently, like life had been slowly hollowing him out. Beside him, Jess chatted animatedly with another friend. Ethan barely responded, gaze restless, searching. And then it landed on me. For 2 seconds, we locked eyes. Just 2 seconds. Enough for him to know I saw him. Then I turned back to my conversation, calm and unmoved, as though he were a stranger passing by. A few minutes later, Jess walked over alone. Hey, she said carefully. Can I ask you something kind of awkward? I raised an eyebrow. Go ahead. Ethan wants to talk to you. Just for a minute. Closure, he said. I sipped my drink unbothered. He's not looking for closure, Jess. He's looking for a reset button, and I'm not interested in pressing it. Jess sighed, lowering her voice. Honestly, I don't blame you. He's not doing great. He told me Isla was the worst mistake of his life. She drained his savings, pushed everyone away, and now she's already moved on. He's been trying to patch things up with people, but I cut her off gently. It's not my job to help him rebuild what he chose to destroy. Jess nodded slowly, no protest. Just a quiet acceptance that some bridges couldn't be rebuilt. The rest of the night, I let myself be present. I danced under the lights, laughed with friends I hadn't seen in years, ate cake without guilt. At one point, someone handed me a glass of champagne and said, "You seem lighter lately, Jean, like something finally let go." I didn't explain. I didn't need to. The truth was written all over me in the way I held myself, in the ease of my smile, in the peace that came from knowing I had walked away and never looked back. As the evening wound down, guests began saying their goodbyes. I stepped outside to call a car, and that's when it happened. Footsteps behind me, a hesitant pause. Jean Ethan's voice rasped, softer than I remembered. I turned calm and steady, ready to face him one last time. Ethan stood a few feet away, glass of wine dangling from his hand like an anchor. His eyes were hollow, his voice rough around the edges. "You really aren't going to say anything to me?" he asked. I looked at him, really looked. His shoulders hunched under the weight of choices he couldn't take back. The shine that once drew everyone in was gone, replaced by shadows of bitterness and regret. "I already said everything I needed to," I replied, with my silence. He swallowed hard, shifting his weight. "I thought maybe, after all this time, you'd understand. Maybe we could talk. Try again." I shook my head slowly. "You don't miss me, Ethan. You miss the version of me that carried your chaos without complaint. That woman isn't available anymore." His mouth opened, then closed. The truth seemed to land heavier than any insult ever could. "You've changed," he whispered almost to himself. "Yes," I said simply. Turns out being treated like I wasn't enough was exactly the push I needed to realize I already was. For a moment, his face softened, like he wanted to reach for the old script apologies, nostalgia, maybe even tears. But there was nothing left for me to give. My ride pulled up, headlights washing over us. I gave him a small nod, not cruel, not triumphant, just final. Then I turned, opened the car door, and left him standing there, clutching a glass of wine like it might save him from drowning. No fireworks, no dramatic outburst, just the kind of closure that comes when you finally stop waiting for someone else to see your worth. I don't think about Ethan much anymore. He became a lesson, not a loss. And me, I never had to fight to prove I was enough. I just had to walk away and let time prove it for me.